Hello and welcome to the Code Leaders podcast, where I chat to people who've made the transition from an IC position into a leadership role, the experience from this, the learning curves, and some key insights to take away, and everything else in between. For episode 1, I'm joined by Danny Currie, who's a lead developer over at IMG Arena. Danny heads up a major team of devs over within the software engineering department. So firstly, I thought, particularly with your profile, where you've definitely made that move from that senior engineer focused on like hands-on expertise into somebody who's then able to correlate that experience into helping others and managing and leading. And that definitely seems like there's two major career paths that not just in engineering, but as a whole people can take, where you go down that really IC focused route, or you can move into like the leadership focused route with an emphasis on like motivating others and communication. Like what would you say sort of drew you to the latter on that?
So I guess what drew me to that is really when I reflected on my career so far, and particularly looking at for the times where I felt, I guess, most fulfilled and that I most enjoyed in my career, it tended to be the cases where I was working much more with people and I guess doing some of those kind of traditional leadership type activities, because that's one of the things I've sort of come to realize about leadership is it isn't necessarily a role. It's really more a set of behaviors and practices. And I started in a startup, for example, and obviously in that environment, you're wearing several different hats at different times, and I gravitated more towards a sort of product role there, where I was doing things like trying to set a vision for the product and trying to get people to buy into that, which is obviously a key part of leadership. And even when I was working more in engineering as a senior engineer, um, then the times I really enjoyed was kind of the mentoring and coaching and working with others, and again trying to think about strategy and look at what's coming down at us and trying to plan for that. So when the chance came up to go to IMG in a leadership role, I thought actually this is a good chance to I guess formalize some of that and take the step to actually doing that in a formal leadership role where I have actual line management responsibilities and responsibilities for people and their careers. So it was a bit of that really, just to I guess to sort of double down on what I enjoyed, and also, if I'm honest, probably what I was good at, in terms of those engineering roles. I think that was probably more where my strengths lied, as opposed to just purely technical and coding side of things.
Yeah, so that was sort of like almost the plan in a sense, rather than like a some people seem to like not fall into like a leadership role, but it's something that is just a responsibility given to them at a time, just to a situation. But you obviously recognize that strength that you had, from being a senior engineer, mentoring, and then decided, consciously that that's something that you want to step into then.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I guess early in your career, you have this idea that your career will be this kind of this sort of straight line that makes a lot of sense when you look at it from a zoomed out perspective. But I think actually what you find is most people's careers, they tend to kind of meander and move between IC and leadership roles, which is certainly what I've done. But yeah, particularly with my most recent role, that was quite an intentional step, I think, to double down on the leadership side. I felt that I'd gotten some good functional experience behind me, and it was now time to, I guess, try and do leadership properly, and do it as a full time thing rather than doing it, in and around other things that I was doing.
Yeah, and it's like definitely not for everyone, is it, as well? Like lots of people just seem to get a thrill out of just going and actually working on their own projects and getting down and doing their hands-on work rather than sort of helping a team alongside. So yeah, it's good to have that motivation, I guess, and move into that. And like when you first stepped into that sort of decision, then like, was there any like challenges that you weren't expecting? Like, how did you find it at first?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, there's definite challenges. As I said earlier, really, when you look at it, and I say this to engineers who are thinking about it as well, thinking about making that jump, or maybe they're looking at the career ladder at their organization and they're thinking, do I want to go for principal staff or do I want to go for lead and engineering manager? That really, I mean, every case is different, and every leadership role is different. Every team is different, and everyone has a different balance of where they are in terms of being hands on and hands off. Um, but for me, I think it was certainly a challenge initially, to I guess let go of my own sort of engineering work. That is an area that I really enjoyed and still enjoy, and I still do bits of it certainly. But you have to recognize that you can't become a bottleneck for your team, and you can't just go in and solve all the big challenges. Your job now is to get the team to solve those big challenges, however makes sense for you to do that, whether that's coaching or working together or pairing. That's your job now, is to get the team to produce, not to produce yourself. So that shift is certainly a difficult shift to make.
Hmm.
So that was probably the major challenge, really, is just letting go of some of that individual contributor work and focusing more on the team's output, individually and collectively, and recognizing that really that is your output as a leader. That's what you're judged on, and that's what you should be focused on getting the most of, rather than you know taking on these exciting, interesting technical challenges, which is, I guess, what you, to your point earlier, is more what you're focused on as an IC.
Yeah, I imagine sort of initially that's quite hard, isn't it, to like move away
Mm.
from you doing it yourself. And I'm sure there's some stuff that you wish you could just jump straight into, but then like delegating
Yeah.
that to somebody else and having that trust as well. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so and we actually sort of at Formula, we ran like a meetup a few months back where like the topic was all about productivity and how that's like maximized really. So I sort of guess as a leader, and since you stepped into those roles and the roles you had in the past, I guess sort of productivity would be measured sort of differently. Sort of transitioning from like not just that intrinsic value of your work, which is like relatively objective. You can measure your own performance in a sense, I guess, into like that ability for you to like raise the performance of your team, coaching them, improving them, which sometimes can be quite intangible, I guess. Like
Yeah.
how do you say you like measure that productivity and your team's performance and know that you're leading in a
Mm.
productive way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So obviously, there's a load of ways of looking at productivity of a team. Some of them I think are better than others, in my opinion. But certainly as a leader, yeah, well, to look at it another way, as an engineer, right, you have all of these great feedback loops. You've got tests which were previously broken that are now passing. You've got PRs going through. You've got story points and all these sorts of things that you can look at the end of the day and say, okay, this is what I've achieved. This is what I've done. Um, in a leadership role, you have less of those, or at least those feedback loops are much longer. So you tend to look at kind of longer time horizons, across a sprint. How are we doing? Am I getting everybody over the line in terms of their tickets? And it's nice to see that burn down chart going down. That's one way of looking at it.
Hmm.
At the quarterly level, looking at your quarterly objectives and thinking, are we keeping on track of these? And what can I do personally to try and keep the team focused on those things, and see those numbers going down? Because I think it is important to create these metrics, almost these scorecards, to sort of focus the team on. But sometimes your work is a lot less tangible than any of that. I have days, sometimes I chat to my partner, for example, and obviously within reason, I might share bits and pieces about what's going on. I might say, oh, I had this call today,
Hmm.
or this happened, and I had this conversation. And sometimes she says, do you ever do any work? You're always just talking. And I say, well, actually, that kind of is the work, really.
Hmm.
And you can't neglect that stuff. Sometimes your job is to listen, or to coach, or to try and help someone reframe a situation, or their day, or what's been going on with them. So you can't neglect that side of things as well. That sometimes you have to basically um, just do what the team needs at any one time, and working out what that thing is that the team needs is obviously very, very difficult, and varies from person to person. But um, yeah, I think that's sometimes you just have to accept. There isn't going to be a nice kind of thing I can tick off my to do list when it comes to this task. What I need to
Hmm.
do right now is support the team a different way. But I think it helps to kind of frame your work, in these terms. Like sometimes you are kind of cranking things out, and you're doing slide decks, Jira. Sometimes you're working on technical stuff, design docs, whatever it is. Sometimes you're pairing, sometimes you're doing planning, but then sometimes you are information gathering or information sharing or communicating or nudging people along. And it helps to kind of recognize that that stuff is important too. Just because there isn't a nice tangible outcome that you can look at doesn't mean it isn't worth doing, and it isn't important to the team.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, I imagine sort of there's different types of individuals that you've managed and so on, like throughout the years. Like, do you sort of personally adapt your leadership style differently depending on situation, or do you have like tried and tested methods?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career, I probably relied more on tried and tested methods. And I think one of the things we're lucky at Endeavour, right, that we get really good training, we get leadership training, and we get some great perspectives from other leaders, and we talk to each other as a leadership community. And that's one of the things I've learned, is actually that it all starts with the team, and the team is made up of individuals, and your job as a leader really is to know those people and how they like to how they like to get feedback, how they like to work, and you need to adapt your style. Communication is a two-way thing, right? Just because you put something out there doesn't necessarily mean it's been heard, and you have a responsibility, I think, as a leader, to make sure that you're adapting your style and your communication to the people that you're trying to support. So
Hmm.
yeah, certainly early on, I think I relied a lot on reading leadership books and blogs and podcasts, and things like that. Um, but really, I think you've first of all you've got to adapt those things to your own style, because I think people will sense inauthenticity. People will sense if they are being kind of quote unquote managed, or
Hmm.
by somebody. So you have to first of all make sure you're finding your own style that's authentic, but then secondly, you need to adapt that style to the individuals, and how do they not like to be spoken to? How do they like to get feedback? So yeah, it's this is why everyone says leadership is, each situation is different, each team, each person's
Hmm.
different, and your job is to find out the most effective way to get things done in that situation.
Yeah, and like yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all approach, is it? 100%. And
Mhm.
yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like that's something that you've realized as well, like as you've moved throughout your career and stuff, which is great. And then in terms of like sort of, if you were a software engineer, say, listening or watching this, and you had that aspiration of like stepping into a leadership or a management role, like what would your advice be, I guess, to like a budding Danny who's maybe looking to take that step in?
Yeah, what would my advice be? Um, I think, I mean, one of the difficult things about this whole area that I've found is a lot of the best advice is the stuff that's very cliched and you hear over and over. But unfortunately, these things are they're cliches for a reason. So I think the number one thing that I've learned is to be authentic. And again, that's something that every LinkedIn post on leadership will tell you, right? But um, you do need to find your own way of getting comfortable practicing leadership, is what I've found. Um, people will sense inauthenticity, and you'll be less effective as a result. So I think one of the key things that I would encourage people to do is just practice leadership behaviors, even though you may not be in a leadership role. Look for opportunities to coach and mentor people, to practice those skills and get better at them, and also to see if it is something that you enjoy. Because I've seen a lot of people go into leadership roles and bounce straight back out of them to IC because they don't enjoy it. So I think it's good to practice things, just for that reason, to see if it is a career path you want to take. So I think that's the
Hmm.
first thing, is look for opportunities to practice those skills, and really find your own way to engage in those practices. The other thing I would say is it is good to also pair that with theory. There's so much great advice out there. There's classic books that are worth reading. There's tons of great podcasts out there. There's lots of great blogs and content out there on leadership. And there's lots of great mentors out there. If you, I mean, I mentor quite a few people, and people are always delighted to mentor. So do give it a shot if you see somebody that you admire and that you think is doing the role that you might want to do. Then take the chance and ask them if they'll mentor you or spend some time with you now and again to sort of talk about the role and talk about how they might develop themselves into that. So take all that advice that's out there, try and find mentors, but then combine that with your own style and find your own
Hmm.
sort of leadership voice. I think is the key to it that I've found so far. And obviously, I'm still learning like everybody else, right? Um, and I think the other thing I would say is again is just find opportunities to practice this. Look for opportunities to do planning, to do strategy, perhaps take responsibility for quarterly planning in your team for a quarter or something like that. Find
Hmm.
mentors, find mentees, find people who would like coaching, and give those things a try. And don't wait to be in a leadership role to actually practice leadership. I think that's the key to it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Good info there. I think, yeah, like rather than just throwing yourself on a deep end, like prepare yourself for it if you can, and make sure you hit the
Mhm.
ground running, I guess, when you get going with that sort of role. And I think one thing that I could imagine over like the last few years, particularly, would have been really difficult, um, as it's definitely the norm now, remote working, but somebody stepping into that role for the first time potentially when they're working in like a fully remote setting, whether that be in over COVID or just a company now that operates, on a completely remote basis, like not having that almost face-to-face contact, which I guess sometimes can be deemed really important. But
Mhm.
maybe that's not the case so much in the modern era. Like how have you found, I guess, sort of leading and taking that role with
Mhm.
people who may not meet for quite an extended period of time or ever really?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That is a really big challenge. I think for a number of reasons. Um, One is I think it's made communication more difficult. Um, there's so many behavioral and communication aspects that we pick up from chatting in person, and you tend to miss a lot of those. And from a perspective of creating a team culture and creating a cohesive team, um, it's all about helping people feel like they belong in that team, and they know what the team's about and what we're trying to do. And you've got to work harder, I think, to generate those kind of belonging cues and that sort of vision. So I think certainly a learning for me has been to over communicate. I've realized if I really need people on my team to know something, it's no good just to throw a message into the team Slack channel, right? I think you've got to put a message in Slack. You might have to email as well. You might have to make it an agenda point on everyone's one-to-one. You really need to hammer these key messages home. But that also means you need to be selective with your communication as well, because people will only take in so many things, right? If you're throwing information out constantly, how are people going to pick up on the most important things? So you need to be quite mindful about how you communicate. But that said, I mean, we have much better tools than we've ever had before. I have fully remote team members that we only see every now and again, and they're doing a great job. So I think there's a lot of fear mongering around hybrid work, and I certainly do prefer hybrid work to fully remote myself. I like to be in and around people. I think people, particularly when you have people on your team who are early in their careers, I think it's really important to make sure they get a lot of face time, and that they're able to do that kind of incidental learning by sitting around a desk and pairing on something. I think that stuff is super important. But we have to adapt, right? And you have to make sure that everyone on your team has the right experience. So it's not an excuse or you can't just have the excuse of saying, well, this person's fully remote, therefore, I'm not going to integrate them like the rest of the team. I think you have to make sure everyone is getting a good experience on your team. That's one of your primary jobs, I think, as a leader.
Hmm.
So I think there are challenges for sure, but there are also huge advantages to it as well. I think people can focus better. I think people tend to be happier in my experience, generally with more balance. So people can have more active lifestyles. They can go to the gym at lunchtime before work, that sort of thing. For me, in December, right, for example, my daughter's been having all sorts of performances at school. It's great for me to get
Hmm.
out and see those, and then pop back and be at my desk, half an hour later. So you can't discount these things in terms of building a happy team as well. But I think as a leader, the major learning I've had is just to, over communicate. Just really make sure that the messages that you want to be received are being really hammered home to everyone who needs them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can imagine it's a challenge, but also like once you get used to it and hybrid, yeah, it seems to be a really good method, doesn't it? But yeah, that whole debate between
Mm.
remote on site is a whole different different debate, isn't it? Which split its opinion. And like in terms of like the culture as well, I guess that you try and build in your team. Obviously, company culture is one thing, but I guess when it's a more tightly knit team that or squad of engineers, is there anything in particular that you like to do to sort of build that, I guess, in a sense, and that almost camaraderie?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I think some of the things I've seen work well. Certainly, having cameras on is a really simple one that we found really works well. It's so easy to just kind of join a call and say hello and then switch your camera off. But I think having cameras on, really does help. Um, I think it's nice to have kind of fun little rituals. So in our team, for example, when we do our retro, we have some things like we spin a wheel of names to see who's going to do the next one. That's kind of, people look forward to that. That's quite good fun.
Hmm.
And we always mix up retro formats, so people will put all kinds of wacky sort of stuff in the retro boards, which helps. So I think you've got to just find ways of, I guess, injecting a bit of levity into things, and but also just making sure that you build in time for people to just chat. Not every stand up has to just hammer straight into the board and what's been going on. Make
Hmm.
sure that for you as a leader that initiate conversations, ask people how things were going in these settings to make it clear that it's that's what's expected in these sessions. It's not just
Hmm.
about talking about work. We can chat about other things, and I think try and do that inclusively as well. One thing again. In an endeavor leadership course I was doing, this is something I really learned was someone was talking about kind of office chit chat, and they said the thing that annoys me in my team is that they all just talk about football every morning, and I don't like football, and
Mm,
I just can't really contribute. So that was a kind of a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because we've got a few football fans in our team, and we're a
yeah.
sports based company, so we often kind of default to that. So for me as a leader, one thing I'll try and do is sort of throw in something else now and again, and make sure we've got other things to talk about in those situations. So um, I think the sorts of things that you try and do to build a bit of culture in the team, I don't think they've necessarily changed a great deal in the sort of hybrid working era. You're still looking to inject a bit of levity, get people talking to each other, outside of just work topics. These kind of things. These are the things we always did as well. But before COVID and hybrid working, so I think you just got to find new ways of doing these and harnessing some of the tech that we've got to make these things happen.
Yeah, I think one point that inclusivity is really important, isn't it? Like you said, not everybody's into footy, so it's hard, isn't it, to remember that sometimes and actually sort of
Yeah.
try and make an inclusive environment for everybody. But yeah, no, that's some really good points there. But Danny, yeah, no, it's been really, really insightful. Everything really we've talked about here. Some really good points to take away, I think, that I think everyone can move into their journey as they move into leadership roles, really. So yeah, really appreciate your time.
Not at all. Thanks again for having me, Marcus. It's been really good fun.